What you see here is a recreation of McFarlane Toy Collectors getting their cancellation order from Walmart. Modeled after one of the more seminal takes on The Dark Knight and finally fulfilling a lot of people's desired interpretation of Batman, we finally get a Year One Caped Crusader. Unfortunately, it comes in the way of being a Walmart exclusive, or at least seemingly so, since that morning, so many people were left befuddled and quite frankly very angry at the notion that they couldn't really check out. And for some reason, that whole pre-order window, that whole launch was severely botched. Thank God that at the time, I decided to get curious, went over to the McFarlane Toy Store, and noticed that they had a bundle of both him and Gordon set for release through there. So, managed to secure a pre-order before it sold out, and now we finally got the Gold Label exclusive Year One Batman in DC Multiverse form, though he is going to come across a little familiar to some because he is retroactively using a bulk of the DC Rebirth Batman body as far as the tooling and sculpting of the legs, the chest, and everything. But frankly, I feel like that's actually one of the bodies that could probably favor a Batman such as this, considering that, you know, the whole terminology of DC Rebirth is to start over, and considering that this is meant to be Batman in his first year as the Dark Knight, as the Caped Crusader, I feel like thematically and physically, it's a really well-made decision to have this guy be the vessel to convey that in DC Multiverse 7-inch format. And you can see that for the majority of the body, that does in fact work. As far as the slimmer nature to Batman, he's not necessarily meant to be this bulky, and thematically, like I said, it really ties in very well. And as far as the color scheming is concerned, I understand that they opted in for a much grayer and muted down palette as far as the darker aesthetics of the gray, the very simple bat symbol there on the chest plate, which in my opinion, I think is the only unique part of the sculpting for the musculature and the body. Kind of harkens back a little bit to the Cowardly Lot Batman that I recently covered. But this time around, I feel like DC Rebirth is, like I said, a good foundation, a good canvas to paint the Year One Batman on. And in this certain circumstance, even though I still get curious as to what it would be like, at least for what is, again, alleged to be maybe the last year of McFarlane holding the DC license, I still from time to time get curious what it would be like if they were to build a brand new from the ground up body sculpt for a Batman. And I feel like out of all character interpretations, Year One Batman probably would have been a fitting opportunity, but at least they went with a buck that's not yet, again, Hush or Nightfall. Instead, they opted in for DC Rebirth, which was starting to get just a little saturated when that figure was released, because after that, we got that 3-pack that came with Batwoman, as well as Clayface, and then we had the Fidgetal, we had a Frostbite edition from GameStop, but then things got quiet. We have the body kind of making a bit of a resurgence, but with a fitting approach, especially with, like I said, the color scheming that I think really does nail down the aesthetic lifted from that comic. It's pretty nice. Even when it's the standard edition or the platinum version, because there is technically a platinum variant out there of this guy. I personally don't feel the need to get him, but I do understand if some people could find it and then consider it to be their definitive Batman, or at least their definitive take on the Year One version, considering that it's going for that black and white aesthetic. And strangely enough, I've seen some pictures and it doesn't look half bad. But for now, the color scheming on the default version, especially as it's kind of focused and honed in with the utility belt with this muted kind of beige color to the cargo pockets and the buckle on the front, is doing a really nice, fine enough touch. And it's punctuated very beautifully by this head sculpt. I don't know what it is, but there's something pretty simple yet very well done and solid about the head sculpt. It's got kind of like a fusion between a little bit of Rebirth, a little bit of Year One, and honestly, it could just be my personal bias, but a little bit of animated series with the girth of the overall density of the head, the sculpting of the mouth plate. It doesn't look, I don't know what it is, but there's something just much more solidly built. I like the pasty complexion, considering that, like I said, this is Year One Batman. He's probably spending the majority of his time either holed up in Wayne Manor or simply going out into the night before he decides to become a little bit more philanthropic with his duties as Bruce Wayne during the daytime. So I do like that approach, and like I said, the very triangular wide eyes, and something about, like I said, the simplicity yet spherical look to the cowl is just doing it for me. That looks very well modeled after the year one Batman in the comics, but at the same time, if I wanted to kind of consider this for potential head swaps with other recent Batman figures, hell, I've already seen some people taking this head sculpt and applying it to some more recent releases or some other Batmans to kind of retool and swap out to make their own makeshift definitive Batman. I've seen one picture that's making me tempted to pull back out the Cowardly Lot Batman I recently covered, but then prop this guy's head sculpt on top and see if it does a number on me to kind of distract me away from the red lip that Cowardly Lot Batman did have on his. So that would be pretty effective, and it's huge remarks, really good positive remarks on that head sculpt. And it's pretty enough to distract me away from some slight grievances that I do have with the utilization of the rebirth bug here, because I have no initial problem with them using that specific body sculpt for this guy, considering, like I said, the thematic ties with him being year one Batman, but at least they could have done it without mimicking and copying and pasting certain things one-to-one, specifically some slight little like lines and panelings that they still have sculpted in to sections here of the bicep and the shoulder that are directly lifted from the Rebirth Batman. I'm sorry, I know that an easy excuse here would be that it's part of his armor, but frankly, that was directly still left there from the Rebirth body sculpt, only coated in purple with that slightly darker blue hue that he had on the Rebirth body version. So, kind of replicated here. I gotta be honest, I know I don't have the figure on hand, but I've already seen the pictures. Kind of reminds me of the recent issue that I had with the BVS Alfred that's literally utilizing the same sculpt of sleeves and arms from the Jail Cell Joker Gold Label edition, to the point where they kept the hexagonal shapes in the sleeves and they didn't bother to like smooth it out or chisel it or paint over it of any kind. It's still there, and it's a very definitive trait of that Joker. So to have it on Alfred to this day, it's kept me from purchasing it altogether. And this little characteristic is kind of reminding me a little bit of that. I'm willing to excuse like very similar creases to like the gauntlets and the boots and things like that that are completely lifted from Rebirth, because it's like, okay, it's articles of clothing, it's texture, whatever. That's fine. That's completely fine. And then, of course, the musculature behind the body. But specific traits like this lining that's happening on the bicep and the shoulder, as well as these segmentations and panels that you got going on at the top of the boot, that is completely lifted from Rebirth. Like I said, that's something that I wish they would have taken the extra bit of time to smooth out so that it feels a little bit more wholly or wholesome, so to speak, to this specific year one Batman, instead of just reminding me, or at least breaking the immersion, that this is just Rebirth Batman with a brand new coat of paint. Only this time, unlike Rebirth Batman, he doesn't come with a rubberized cape. He's got the nylon cape over here that's made out of fabric felt soft good. And sure, it's not double stitched or refined, but I do have to give him some commendations for giving us a very, very tough and robust wire on the end rims right here that makes it very feasible for postability and extension. And speaking of postability, the articulation is just as good as that of the Rebirth body. Even though the head is a brand new sculpt, it's still able to rotate the full 360, no problem. It's even a little bit ratcheted with the peg that's inside, and can still tilt a pretty decent amount up and down. Not as fluid as some other Batmans, but still does the job, as well as side to side. The arms, because it's this time favoring due to the fact that it's got a cloth cape as opposed to a wired cape, it's able to rotate a bit more feasibly 360 degrees vertical, as well as extend onto towards the sides via the hinge inside. You can even see that washer right there that allows just a little bit of butterfly movement to kind of extend forwards and backwards and slightly shrug, but it's not as free-flowing as some other Batman or even Superman figures that have been released as of late. However, the biceps can still rotate all the way around, though they do feel a little bit on the narrower side, but again, we have to keep in mind that this is the Rebirth body, so it's going to be a little bit on the slim downside. Two joints at the elbows that can fully bend all the way up. The wrist joint, even though it's a ball joint, can still favor the hands being able to rotate the full 360, as well as bend inwards and outwards a pretty good amount. Torso articulation is where we get into some very iffy territory, because it can rotate. It almost feels like it wants to rotate 360 a pretty good amount, and I feel like I was able to do it on the Rebirth, but there's something about the way that it got assembled here on Year 1 Batman that, I'm not gonna lie, it kind of stagnates a little bit when we get to about that point, to the point where it almost feels like mine. It could be an isolated incident, but I do feel like maybe mine got assembled in a very misaligned sort of way. So that could be touted as a bit of a QC problem. Only this time we're not necessarily talking about sculpting or paint taps, but rather assembly of a joint. And this time I feel like the victim is going to be the mid-torso joint or articulation from the inside, because even though I can still twist it, you can see there a fair amount from side to side and can still kind of crunch and extend towards the back and towards the front a good amount. It can never really rotate 360 because it feels like it's out of angle and it skews. And I feel like another symptom of that would have to be that if you kind of try to neutrally pose and put it back into a normal vertical stance, the torso here, you'll notice that he's kind of slumping his pelvis. It's almost like he's lunging his pelvis forward ever so slightly, and I can never get this thing to be aligned completely vertical from top to bottom. I can't do it. Like, I've tried nudging this. I tried to see if I could shift the top chest piece towards his right, my left, to see if I could get the abdominal area right here, the abdominal surface, to align with the bat symbol, and I can't. So if any of you guys have managed to garner the year one Batman or get it shipped in, please tell me on your guys's, is this just an isolated incident on my specific unit, or is this a widespread issue to where they might have manufactured the mid-torso joint a little askew, and therefore it's causing, like I said, like this kind of like pose where everything looks like he's kind of protruding his pelvis ever so slightly? Please let me know. And a similar thing could be said about the waist. It can technically rotate the full 360 unlike the mid-torso, but this time it does feel like it's assembled a little bit more straightforward to where I don't feel like it's kind of break off or it's at a slant, and can also further extend and crunch side to side, front and back. So at least there's a little bit of reprieve found there. Top leg joints can fully extend despite the diaper piece a pretty good amount towards the top like so, as well as extend towards the back ever so slightly there. Good extension on even parts right there towards the outside parts of the leg, and then full bending of the knees via the two joints right about right there. No problem. Pretty standard, but also it kind of favors, only this time, unlike DC Rebirth Batman, we don't have any very garish over designs of the knee pads to make it look like, you know, bat faces right here like he did. I'm sorry, that's one of the few little nitpicks I have about the DC Rebirth Batman, but I rest my case. We also have ball joints at the ankles that can fully favor the foot to bend downwards and pivot upwards and even side to side like so, and even a full rotation at the top of the joint 360 horizontally, and the toes can fully bend at a 90-degree angle right about right there. So pretty good amount of articulation and pretty fluid. Like I said, the only major problem that I do have is that mid-torso assembly of the tooling there, but I am adamant that I think it's just my specific unit, because not even the DC Rebirth Batman had the waist and the whole pelvic area being forced out and misaligned, as you can kind of sort of slightly see it right about right there. So that's the one thing that I think is probably just a very unfortunate circumstance here. But unfortunately, what was replicated a little too accurately from the DC Rebirth Batman would have to be the Batarang accessory. Very similar to yet another Batman that I recently covered, the Justice Lord Batman. I called it out there. I'm going to call it out here. It's the same Batarang accessory from the previous book that they're taking inspiration from. This time, it's DC Rebirth Batman's Batarang, only this time it's coated in silver, as opposed to the last one, which I think was yellow, like a darkish kind of yellow, if I'm not mistaken. Or no, it was like black with a yellow outline, at least if I remember correctly. I could be wrong about that, but I don't remember it being chrome, and this time it was swapped in for a color deco here. And again, I understand that there's probably some kind of logistics explanation as to why it is that they replicate Batarangs. I think I remember there being a very passerby interview where even Todd himself was talking about how sometimes swapping out a simple accessory outside of Batman but with other characters and molding something from the ground up can literally set a figure back like 2 or 3 months, because they have to like clear it and then mass produce it, etc. But if that's the case, then try to think of this in as far as advanced as possible. And I understand that Todd himself probably has a lot of things to kind of keep in mind. You know, he's only one guy, and he's the Todd father. He's the guy at the top. So there should be like a good chunk of people underneath that their job is to kind of, almost like a line producer on a film set, to kind of cross-check and examine okay, what scene did we just film, and what was that character's wardrobe looking like to make sure it's accurate for the next scene for the sake of consistency, for like narrative cohesion or anything like that. I feel like there should be a similar approach with toy manufacturing, to where somebody should probably have checked this, to where like we're reutilizing the DC Rebirth box, and someone should be like, okay, well, are we gonna, we need to know this now. Do we use the same Batarang, or do we make one from the ground up? But it needs to be done in advance, to where maybe they could look at their budget, the timeline, and be like, oh yeah, we can afford both money and time to make a brand new Batarang as opposed to the same one. Because at this point, it's like, okay, well, I don't feel a sense of specialness with this. I don't. And I know I'm ranting about a Batarang. I know. But if I don't do it, then who will? There's going to be so many. This is going to be that web strand accessory problem that I was having with Marvel Legends, where I was pulling out the same web strand for any Spidey over and over and over again. And I don't want that to happen with Batarangs for my Batman figures. Whether it's from McFarlane, or whether it's from Mattel later in the future, or hell, even Spin Master. And sure, this guy does a decent job of fitting into, of course, his only gripping hand, which is going to be on the right one. So this is one of the circumstances that, yeah, maybe some swappable hand accessories, a bonus set. I probably would have accepted this a little bit better if he came with bonus hands, because when I think of year one Batman, he needs to have some form of novelty. And I feel like, sure, the body sculpt is really, really nice. It could really pass as a definitive Batman for a lot of folks. And again, out of all this, the one element that surprised me would have to be that head sculpt. I really cannot stop raving about it enough, and I truly do enjoy it. But for being a Walmart exclusive of what a lot of people consider to be like their last checkbox seminal Batman in the form of year one take on that character, this needed just a little bit of extra refinement. But for what was put out, I have more problems with the way that the pre-orders were launched than I do with the figure itself. Finally in hand, I can think to myself, yeah, it would have been a cool opportunity to see a brand new body sculpt from the ground up, but for choosing the DC Rebirth Batman was still a wise choice and resulted in a pretty good year one Batman that is a good addition to my collection. I'm glad that I own it, but I wouldn't blame anybody if their expectations were not fully met with this release. So therefore, I'm going to be giving the year one Batman a very, very high and enthusiastic, yet still pretty humbled 7 out of 10. It's a really definitive pickup if you manage to come across him in store at a Walmart, considering of how much of an exclusive he is. But at the same time, just know that going through the trouble of like paying scalper prices just because of that exclusivity may not be the wisest choice to do with this guy, considering that, again, at the end of the day, it is the DC Rebirth Batman with the year one coat of paint on him. That still is a really good marriage, but it's still something to take into consideration and be pointed out in a review. And I think with this guy, we might just be getting ever so closer to a definitive set or collection of pretty much almost every interpretation of Batman that has been kind of brought in from the comics over to the DC multiverse realm. Granted, there's probably still a good amount of few iterations that I'm probably skipping here or forgetting or not really bringing to my attention. So in the comment section below, guys, what's a Batman that you think to yourselves, and I might have already asked this question, but I feel like with year one Batman, checking that particular box for certain collectors and probably thinking to themselves, okay, if the license runs out, we're good. We got the year one Batman. But some others may not be so quick to be satisfied. So down in the comment section, what's still a definitive version of Batman from either very iconic arcs in the comics? People often call upon Dark Knight Returns, which we have already gotten a handful of those. Year one Batman, Long Halloween, Year two Batman, which is of McFarlane's own design. They often talk about those guys. What's a Batman to you that you think to yourselves, before they run out of that license, DC Multiverse, get on it? Let me know down below. And as always, guys, if you guys enjoyed this review, hit the thumbs up button. If not, hit the thumbs down. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Take care and stay humble.